The morning light streamed through the high windows of Grace Restored Church, casting vibrant hues from the stained glass windows onto the polished wooden pews. The sanctuary buzzed with energy as congregants arrived for a special occasion, the 5th anniversary of the church that had become a cornerstone of the Atlanta community. Families filled the pews, greeting each other with warm smiles as children's laughter echoed through the grand space. At the heart of the commotion was Miriam Turner, Pastor Samuel Turner's wife, gracefully managing the flurry of last-minute preparations. With her calm demeanor and nurturing presence, she reassured the volunteers, fixed an errant floral arrangement, and made sure the choir robes were in place. For Miriam, this church was not just her husband's legacy, it was her life's work. "Is everything ready, Miriam?" asked Deacon Harris, adjusting his tie nervously. Miriam offered a reassuring smile. "Everything is in place. This is going to be a day to remember." But behind the pulpit, Samuel Turner's heart raced. Dressed immaculately in his pastoral robes, he stood silently, gripping the edge of his notes. To everyone around him, Samuel was the epitome of a strong, charismatic leader, a man who had risen from humble beginnings to build a church renowned for its passionate sermons and tireless community outreach. Yet, as the congregation swayed to the gospel choir's harmonies, Samuel could feel the weight of his secret bearing down on him. Serena. Olivia. The names whispered in his mind, unbidden and relentless. The congregation rose in unison as the choir concluded its rousing hymn. Samuel walked to the pulpit, his movements deliberate and composed, but inside, he fought to steady his breathing. His wife's encouraging smile from the front pew was a brief balm, but guilt gnawed at his conscience. Could she feel the distance he tried so hard to mask? Could the congregation sense the storm brewing beneath his carefully polished exterior? Samuel opened the Bible, his voice strong and commanding as he began the sermon. "Today we celebrate 5 years of grace, of hope, and of redemption," he declared. The crowd erupted into applause, their faith in him unshaken. He pressed on, his words as magnetic as ever, but each syllable felt heavier than the last. How could he preach about redemption when he was hiding a part of his life so intertwined with sin and deception? Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the church burst open, and all heads turned to the sound. A woman stood framed in the doorway, holding the hand of a little girl and a gun. Gasps rippled through the sanctuary as murmurs filled the air. "Samuel," she cried, her voice trembling with fury and despair. "You can't keep running from this." It was Serena. Her eyes burned with a mix of hurt and anger, her grip tightening around the child at her side. The little girl, Olivia, looked confused, clutching a small doll tightly to her chest. The congregation froze, shock and fear etched on every face. Miriam stood, her hand instinctively covering her mouth, her eyes darting between her husband and the woman in the doorway. The sanctuary, once a place of joy and light, became a stage for a truth that could no longer be hidden. "Tell them," Serena demanded, her voice breaking. "Tell them who I am. Tell them about her." All eyes turned to Samuel, who stood motionless at the pulpit. His face betrayed a mix of emotions, fear, shame, and the realization that his carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. Samuel Turner's voice cracked slightly as he stared at Serena in the doorway, clutching little Olivia's hand and gripping a gun in the other. Time seemed to freeze. The congregation's collective breath held as the shocking scene unfolded. The weight of his double life now lay bare before everyone he had ever sought to inspire. Samuel Turner hadn't always been a man of faith. Decades earlier, in a tough Atlanta neighborhood, he had been just another young man trying to survive. Raised by a single mother who worked tirelessly to make ends meet, Samuel learned early on that the world wasn't kind to dreamers. His teenage years were spent on the streets, falling in with a crowd that promised fast money and the illusion of respect. Hustling, small-time theft, and near-constant danger defined his days. Samuel carried an easy charisma, though, a natural magnetism that often got him out of trouble. It was Mama Hattie, his grandmother, who refused to let him slip through the cracks entirely. "Boy, you've got a spark in you," she'd tell him, her voice sharp but loving. "The Lord's got plans for you, even if you're too blind to see it." Samuel shrugged off her words for years, brushing them aside as the wishful thinking of an old woman who didn't understand his reality. But one night changed everything. A drive-by shooting took the life of his best friend while they sat on a stoop. Samuel narrowly escaped, crouched behind a trash can as bullets whizzed past. In the silence that followed, he felt something he couldn't explain. Fear, yes, but also a pull toward something greater. The next Sunday, much to his grandmother's shock, Samuel followed her to church. He didn't sit in the back row like she expected. Instead, he marched to the front, tears streaming down his face as the pastor spoke about redemption. It was the first time he'd ever felt truly seen, not for what he was, but for what he could become. Samuel's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. He left the streets behind, throwing himself into Bible study and community service with the same intensity he had once applied to hustling. His natural gift for speaking blossomed into a talent for preaching, and people couldn't help but be drawn to his message of hope and second chances. By the time he turned 25, Samuel had been ordained as a minister, and at 30 he founded Grace Restored Church in a rented storefront with just a handful of followers. His charisma and relatable approach to Scripture attracted people from all walks of life. He understood struggle and wasn't afraid to talk about his own. The church grew rapidly, becoming a hub for outreach programs, youth mentorship, and food drives. Samuel seemed to be everywhere at once, on the radio, at community events, always with a word of encouragement or a helping hand. But beneath the surface, Samuel carried a secret that threatened to undo everything he had built. Before his rise as a pastor, Samuel met Serena Williams at a local community center. He was volunteering, counseling at-risk youth, and she was there to pick up her younger brother. She stormed into the room that day, fiery and unapologetic, angry at how long she'd been kept waiting. Samuel was struck by her raw energy, her refusal to hide her emotions. Their connection was instant, electric. Samuel admired Serena's strength, while she was drawn to his calm confidence. They quickly fell into a passionate whirlwind romance, but it wasn't without its challenges. Serena had a temper that flared easily, and Samuel, still finding his footing in life, struggled to meet her intensity. For a while they tried to make it work, but their differences became harder to ignore. When Serena revealed she was pregnant, Samuel's world tilted on its axis. He was still in the early stages of building his ministry and felt unprepared to be a father. Samuel promised to support Serena and their child Olivia, financially and emotionally, but he made a decision that would haunt him for years, to keep them hidden. He convinced himself it was the best way to protect his burgeoning reputation in ministry. Samuel visited Serena and Olivia in secret, always in out-of-the-way places where no one from his congregation would see him. His guilt was immense, but he justified it as a necessary compromise. "I'll fix this one day," he told himself repeatedly, though he never could say how or when. As the years passed and Samuel's star continued to rise, his relationship with Serena grew increasingly strained. She resented being hidden, her anger simmering as she raised Olivia on her own with only sporadic visits and checks from Samuel. Olivia, a bright and curious child, often asked why her daddy never came to see her like other fathers did. Each question twisted the knife of Samuel's guilt deeper. He buried himself in his work at Grace Restored, pouring his energy into the church as if to atone for his failures as a father. The congregation saw a leader and a man of unshakable faith. Only Samuel knew how fragile that foundation truly was. On that fateful Sunday morning, standing before his congregation with Serena and Olivia in the doorway, Samuel realized there was no hiding anymore. The past he had worked so hard to keep separate from his present had come crashing into the sanctuary, demanding to be acknowledged. For the first time in years, Samuel felt exposed, not as the larger-than-life pastor his congregation adored, but as the flawed, frightened man he truly was. And for the first time, he questioned whether redemption would be possible for him too. Miriam Green Turner exuded grace. She was a woman of quiet strength, someone who could calm a storm with a gentle smile and a kind word. When Samuel met her at a regional church conference, he was struck by her serene presence. She wasn't like the fiery and unpredictable women he had known in his youth. Miriam was steady, thoughtful, and deeply rooted in her faith, a perfect counterbalance to his dynamic and charismatic personality. Miriam's life had always revolved around service. Raised in a loving but modest home, she had spent her youth volunteering at food banks and organizing church events. Her kindness and selflessness were well known in her community. When Samuel began courting her, she was initially hesitant, wary of his larger-than-life persona. But his passion for his ministry and his message of redemption won her over. For Miriam, Samuel seemed like a man with a purpose, a beacon of hope in a world full of broken promises. She fell in love with the way he inspired others, with the way he spoke about building a better future, not just for their congregation, but for their entire community. Their courtship was a whirlwind of shared prayers, long conversations about faith and family, and mutual dreams of a ministry that would change lives. When they married, it was a celebration of not just their union, but the beginning of what many saw as a partnership ordained by God. Together, they were the heart of Grace Restored Church: Samuel, the impassioned leader, and Miriam, the calm and nurturing partner who anchored him. Miriam threw herself into her role as the pastor's wife with enthusiasm. She organized charity drives, counseled struggling families, and led Bible studies. To the congregation, she was a perfect embodiment of faith and devotion, a woman who seemed born to walk beside a man like Samuel. In the early years of their marriage, their life together felt almost like a dream. They shared a home filled with laughter and late-night conversations about their goals for the church. Samuel often praised Miriam from the pulpit, calling her his rock and the woman who made his work possible. But there were moments, fleeting at first, when Miriam sensed a distance in Samuel. He would retreat into his study for hours, claiming to work on sermons but emerging with a weight in his eyes she couldn't quite understand. At first, she dismissed it as the stress of leading a growing congregation. "He carries so much responsibility," she told herself. "It's only natural for him to need time alone." Miriam's faith in Samuel and their shared mission kept her from pressing him too hard. She believed that with patience and prayer, any challenge could be overcome. As Grace Restored Church grew, so did Samuel's absences. Late-night meetings, sudden phone calls, and unexplained trips out of town became more frequent. Miriam, ever supportive, tried to justify them. "The ministry is demanding," she would tell herself and others. "Samuel is doing God's work." But doubt began to creep in. She noticed subtle changes in his behavior, the way he avoided her gaze during certain conversations, the tension in his shoulders when he thought she wasn't looking. Once, while tidying his study, she found an unfamiliar scarf tucked under a pile of papers. It smelled faintly of perfume she didn't recognize. She asked Samuel about it, and he brushed it off with a laugh, saying it must have belonged to a visitor to the church. Miriam wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. To question Samuel felt like questioning the foundation of her own life, her faith, and the future they had built together. Despite her efforts to suppress her unease, the cracks in their marriage began to widen. Miriam noticed how Samuel's sermons, once filled with passion and conviction, sometimes felt rehearsed, even hollow. She saw how he avoided certain members of the congregation who sought his guidance, delegating their needs to junior pastors or church elders. One night, as she prepared dinner, she overheard Samuel on a phone call in his study. His voice, usually so confident, was low and urgent, tinged with desperation. "I need more time," he said. "I'm doing everything I can. Please, just don't do anything rash." Miriam's heart sank. She didn't know who he was speaking to, but the tone in his voice was unmistakable. Fear, guilt, and a vulnerability she had never heard from him before. When he emerged from the study, she tried to ask him what was wrong, but he waved her off, claiming it was church business. That night, Miriam lay awake long after Samuel had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling and praying for clarity. Something was wrong, something she couldn't name, but it hung over their home like a dark cloud. To the outside world, Miriam and Samuel were still the perfect couple, leading a thriving congregation. They were featured in local Christian magazines, invited to speak at conferences, and held up as examples of what faith and hard work could achieve. Miriam smiled through it all, playing her role as the dutiful pastor's wife. But inside, she felt the weight of an unspoken truth pressing down on her. She began to wonder if she had been blind to something all along, if her faith in Samuel had been misplaced. Still, she clung to the hope that whatever storm they were facing could be weathered with prayer and love. Miriam's unease reached a breaking point on the day of Grace Restored's 5th anniversary celebration. As she stood at the church's entrance, welcoming congregants with her usual warmth, she noticed Samuel standing off to the side, his face pale and drawn. He seemed distracted, almost as if he were bracing for something. "Are you okay, my love?" she asked, touching his arm gently. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just thinking about the sermon," he said. "It's a big day." Miriam nodded, though she didn't quite believe him. The feeling of impending doom was stronger than ever. As the service began, Miriam took her seat in the front row, watching Samuel deliver his sermon. She couldn't shake the sense that something was terribly wrong. His words, usually so powerful and heartfelt, felt strained. His gaze avoided hers, focusing instead on some distant point at the back of the sanctuary. Then, the doors burst open, and Serena stepped in, holding Olivia's hand and a gun. Miriam's world shattered in an instant. The pieces of the life she thought she knew fell around her like broken glass, leaving her sitting frozen in her seat as Serena's voice rang out, demanding that Samuel acknowledge them. The cracks that Miriam had ignored for so long were no longer cracks. They were gaping chasms, and she was tumbling into the void. The morning of Grace Restored Church's 5th anniversary was alive with anticipation. The sanctuary was filled to capacity, the congregation buzzing with excitement. Serena Johnson sat in her modest apartment across town, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. On her small kitchen table sat a photograph of her daughter Olivia, taken the day she was born. The edges were worn from being held too often. Next to the picture lay a loaded handgun. Serena had spent years in the shadows, a secret that Samuel Turner kept hidden while he built a life of prosperity and acclaim. At first, she had tried to understand. She had believed Samuel's promises, clung to his assurances that he would eventually bring them into the light. But years had passed, and nothing changed. Meanwhile, she watched him rise to prominence, his wife Miriam by his side. A picture-perfect family that didn't include her or their daughter. Her patience had run out. The anger, the betrayal, the humiliation, it had all built to this moment. She could no longer sit by while Samuel lived a lie. Grabbing Olivia's hand, she whispered, "It's time, baby. Time to make your father tell the truth." The service was underway at Grace Restored Church. Pastor Samuel Turner stood at the pulpit, delivering a sermon meant to inspire and uplift. But his words lacked their usual fire. His mind was elsewhere, consumed by the weight of his secrets. In the front row, Miriam watched him with a mixture of pride and concern, sensing the growing distance between them, but unable to pinpoint its source. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors of the sanctuary swung open with a resounding bang. The congregation fell silent, heads turning in unison toward the source of the disruption. Serena stood framed in the doorway, her face a mixture of determination and rage. In one hand, she held Olivia's small, trembling hand. In the other, a gun. "Samuel!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "You can't ignore us anymore." Gasps rippled through the congregation as people scrambled to make sense of what was happening. Samuel froze at the pulpit, his mouth open mid-sentence, his face draining of color. Miriam's hand flew to her chest as she stared at the woman and child standing at the back of the church. Serena began marching down the aisle, dragging Olivia along with her. The child looked confused and frightened, her wide eyes darting around the sanctuary. "You stand up here preaching about truth and redemption," Serena spat, her voice rising with each word. "But you're nothing but a liar." The congregation erupted into chaos. People whispered, some shouted, others tried to retreat toward the exits. Several church elders rushed to intervene, but Serena swung the gun in their direction, causing them to halt in their tracks. "Stay back," she warned. "This is between me and him." Samuel finally stepped out from behind the pulpit, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Serena, please," he said, his voice trembling. "Let's talk about this somewhere else. Not here. Not like this." "Why not here?" Serena challenged, her voice breaking. "This is where you built your perfect little life, isn't it? This is where everyone worships you, thinks you're some kind of saint. It's time they know the truth." Miriam stood frozen, her heart pounding. "Who is she, Samuel?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "And why is she saying these things?" Serena laughed bitterly. "Oh, he hasn't told you? Of course he hasn't. He wouldn't want to ruin his spotless reputation." "Miriam," Samuel began, turning to her, but the words seemed to die in his throat. He looked at the congregation, at Serena, at Olivia, and then back at his wife. The weight of years of deception bore down on him. She's telling the truth," he finally admitted, his voice barely audible. This is Serena. And Olivia. She's my daughter." The air seemed to leave the room. Miriam staggered backward as if she'd been struck. Gasps filled the sanctuary, followed by a stunned silence. "You lied to me," Miriam whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and devastation. "You lied to all of us." Serena's grip on the gun loosened slightly as she saw the effect of Samuel's confession. Tears streamed down her face. "Do you have any idea what it's been like?" she demanded. "Raising our child alone while you play the hero? Do you know what it's like to explain to Olivia why her daddy can't be with her?" Samuel took a cautious step closer, his hand still raised. "I know I've hurt you," he said. "And I've hurt Olivia. But this isn't the way. Put the gun down, Serena. Let's figure this out together." Serena shook her head, the gun trembling in her hand. "You don't get to decide anymore, Samuel. I'm done being quiet. I'm done hiding." Miriam, finding her voice amid the chaos, stepped forward. "Please," she said, addressing Serena directly. "Think about Olivia. She's scared. She doesn't deserve this." At the sound of her name, Olivia whimpered, her small hand clutching her mother's arm. Serena looked down at her daughter, and for a moment her anger seemed to waver. The gun lowered slightly, her grip slackening. But the tension in the room remained thick, the entire congregation holding its collective breath as they watched the scene unfold. Samuel, Miriam, and Serena stood locked in a tableau of betrayal, anger, and heartbreak, the truth now laid bare for all to see. The confession at Grace Restored Church sent shockwaves through the congregation and the broader community. The morning after the anniversary service, headlines screamed the scandal. Beloved Pastor Samuel Turner exposed. Hidden family and financial mismanagement rock Atlanta church. News crews camped outside the church, turning it into a media circus. The once revered sanctuary was now a sight of shame and spectacle. Church members grappled with the revelation. For some, the betrayal felt personal. They had looked to Pastor Samuel as a guide and role model. For others, it was proof of the fallibility of man. Whispers spread of inconsistencies in the church's financial records, and soon investigators were poring over the books. Initial findings pointed to misallocated funds, money meant for community outreach projects redirected to hush payments for Serena and Olivia. Community leaders who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with Samuel now distanced themselves, their public statements carefully crafted to express shock and disappointment without further tarnishing their reputations. The congregation, once united in faith and purpose, began to splinter under the weight of betrayal. In the days following the revelation, Miriam struggled to process the full extent of Samuel's deceit. Her world, carefully constructed over years of faith and dedication, had crumbled overnight. She oscillated between anger and heartbreak, her mind replaying every moment of their marriage, searching for signs she had missed. In the quiet of their home, once a sanctuary, she confronted Samuel. "How could you?" she asked, her voice shaking with emotion. "How could you build a life with me, stand before the congregation, preach about truth and redemption, all while living a lie?" Samuel sat slumped in the armchair, his face drawn and pale. "I thought I could keep it separate," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was protecting you, protecting the church." "Protecting us?" Miriam snapped. "You were protecting yourself. Don't twist this into some noble sacrifice. You lied, Samuel. To me, to Olivia, to everyone." His shoulders sagged further under the weight of her words. He had no defense, no excuses left to offer. Serena's dramatic entrance and brandishing of a gun had landed her in police custody, charged with reckless endangerment and disturbing the peace. Though the charges were serious, they paled in comparison to the emotional fallout of her actions. Sitting in a stark holding cell, Serena replayed the events of the anniversary service in her mind, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. When she was granted a brief visit with Olivia, the sight of her daughter's tear-streaked face broke her resolve. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered, holding Olivia close. "I didn't mean to scare you. I didn't know what else to do." Olivia didn't respond, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. Serena vowed then and there to make amends, no matter how long it took. But for now, her immediate concern was ensuring her daughter's well-being. Social services stepped in, placing Olivia in temporary care with a local foster family while Serena's case was reviewed. The transition was painful for both mother and child, adding another layer of heartbreak to an already tumultuous situation. Within Grace Restored Church, the fallout was both immediate and far-reaching. Attendance plummeted as disillusioned members left in droves, unable to reconcile the image of their beloved pastor with the man who had betrayed their trust. Longtime supporters openly questioned the church's direction, and donations dried up almost overnight. A group of church elders convened an emergency meeting to decide how to move forward. They debated whether the church could survive under its current leadership or if it needed a complete rebranding. Some advocated for disbanding entirely, while others believed the church's mission was too important to abandon, even in the face of scandal. Miriam, despite her personal turmoil, attended the meeting. She spoke with quiet determination. "The church is more than one man's mistakes," she said. "We've done good work here, work that needs to continue. If we abandon Grace Restored now, we abandon the people who need us most." Her words carried weight, and the elders agreed to keep the church operational, at least for the time being. However, they made it clear that Samuel could no longer lead. The man who had once been the heart and soul of Grace Restored was now its greatest liability. As the days turned into weeks, the community around Grace Restored Church struggled to come to terms with the scandal. Local businesses that had partnered with the church reevaluated their associations. Families who had once been active members avoided the building altogether, unable to face the whispers and judgment of their peers. Miriam became a reluctant figurehead during this period, stepping into a role she had never anticipated. She worked tirelessly to address the concerns of the remaining congregation, holding meetings to foster transparency and reassure them that the church's mission would endure. "I don't have all the answers," she admitted during one such meeting, "but I know this. Grace Restored was never about one man. It's about all of us. And if we're willing to work together, we can rebuild. Not for Pastor Samuel, but for our community." Her words resonated with those who stayed, sparking a flicker of hope amid the despair. But it was clear that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. In the Turner household, the sense of betrayal was palpable. Miriam's relationship with Samuel was in tatters, their once solid foundation reduced to rubble. Samuel, now under investigation for financial improprieties, faced the very real prospect of prison time. His public apologies, delivered via press conferences and written statements, rang hollow to those who had once admired him. Miriam, despite her pain, remained steadfast in her commitment to Olivia. She visited the young girl in her temporary foster home, bringing books and toys to help her feel more comfortable. Over time, Olivia began to open up, her initial fear giving way to cautious trust. "You don't have to be scared anymore," Miriam told her one afternoon. "I'm here for you. We'll figure this out together." For Olivia, Miriam's kindness was a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. And for Miriam, caring for Olivia provided a sense of purpose amid the chaos, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was still work to be done. In the aftermath of the scandal, Grace Restored Church was a shadow of its former self. The congregation was fractured, and trust was in short supply. Yet, amidst the chaos, Miriam Turner stepped forward. Though she was reeling from her husband's betrayal and the disillusionment that followed, she found strength in the very faith that had once bound her to Samuel's ministry. She began hosting small, intimate gatherings at the church, inviting members to share their thoughts, grievances, and hopes for the future. The goal wasn't to repair Samuel's image, but to reaffirm the church's mission of compassion and service. "This place was built to be a sanctuary," she told them during one of these meetings. "Not for one man's ego, but for our community. If we've forgotten that, it's time to remember." Miriam also initiated an independent financial audit to address the lingering questions of mismanagement. She worked closely with the church elders to ensure transparency, vowing to rebuild trust with their congregation, one step at a time. Though the process was grueling and often thankless, it was also cathartic. For the first time, Miriam was shaping her own vision for Grace Restored, free from the shadow of Samuel's leadership. Meanwhile, Samuel Turner faced the consequences of his actions. The investigation into his financial dealings uncovered years of deceit, leading to criminal charges of embezzlement and tax evasion. In a tearful courtroom appearance, Samuel pleaded guilty, accepting a prison sentence of 5 years. It was a stark fall from grace for the once revered pastor. In prison, Samuel was forced to confront his choices, He began attending therapy sessions offered by the facility, participating in group discussions about accountability and personal growth. For the first time in years, he had no congregation to charm, no public image to uphold, just the cold reality of his failures. During one session, the group leader asked a simple but piercing question: "What do you want your legacy to be?" The question haunted Samuel. He realized that his life up until now had been a series of compromises and deceptions, all in service of a false image. He resolved to spend his time in prison working on himself, not to reclaim his old life, but to find redemption through honest self-reflection and service. Samuel began writing letters, long, heartfelt messages to Miriam, Serena, Olivia, and even members of the congregation. While he didn't expect forgiveness, he hoped to express his genuine remorse and take responsibility for the pain he had caused. Serena Johnson, now serving a 2-year sentence for her actions at the anniversary service, found herself on a parallel path of healing. Initially consumed by regret and anger, she struggled to make sense of the choices that had led her to that fateful day. But the structure of prison life, combined with mandated therapy sessions, provided an unexpected opportunity for growth. Serena joined a support group for women navigating the complexities of single motherhood, abuse, and trauma. Hearing the stories of others, she began to see her own experiences in a new light, not as an excuse for her actions, but as a way to understand and eventually forgive herself. One day during a group session, a counselor suggested she share her story with others. "You've lived through things many women can relate to," the counselor said. "Your mistakes don't define you, but your willingness to grow from them can inspire others." Encouraged by this, Serena began working with an organization that provided resources and advocacy for single mothers. Though her involvement was limited by her incarceration, her efforts gave her a sense of purpose. She wrote articles for their newsletter, sharing her journey of pain, mistakes, and eventual healing. For Olivia, life after the anniversary service was marked by uncertainty. Taken into temporary foster care following Serena's arrest, she struggled to process the upheaval. But Miriam, true to her word, became a steadfast presence in the young girl's life. She visited regularly, bringing familiar toys and comforting words to help Olivia feel safe. After a few months, Miriam worked with social services to secure custody of Olivia, while Serena served her sentence. The adjustment was challenging at first. Olivia was wary of trusting adults, her young mind grappling with feelings of abandonment and fear. But Miriam's patience and unwavering support slowly broke down those barriers. "I'm not trying to replace your mom," Miriam told her one evening as they painted together at the kitchen table. "I just want to be here for you, however you need." Over time, Olivia began to thrive. She found comfort in Miriam's gentle presence and started participating in church youth programs, forming friendships and rediscovering her sense of belonging. For Miriam, caring for Olivia was both a responsibility and a blessing, a reminder of the power of compassion to heal even the deepest wounds. As Miriam worked to rebuild the church, she encouraged open conversations about what had happened. "We can't move forward if we're not willing to face the truth," she said during one meeting. With the support of the remaining elders, she organized workshops on accountability, transparency, and leadership ethics, ensuring that the mistakes of the past wouldn't be repeated. The church's name was changed to Hope Renewal Center, a reflection of its new mission: to serve as a beacon of healing and second chances for the community. Slowly but surely, members began to return, drawn by the center's commitment to authenticity and service. Miriam also forged an unlikely partnership with Serena. After Serena's release, the two women worked together to advocate for single mothers and survivors of domestic abuse. While their relationship was far from easy, their shared love for Olivia and desire to create a better future gave them common ground. From prison, Samuel supported these efforts in whatever small ways he could. He used his limited resources to write encouraging letters to the congregation and donated funds from his prison job to the center's programs. Though he knew he could never fully atone for his actions, these small gestures allowed him to feel connected to the work of rebuilding. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote in a letter to Miriam, "but I hope in some way I can contribute to the good you're creating. Thank you for showing me what true grace looks like." Grace Restored Church reopened its doors under a new name, Hope Renewal Center. The decision to rebrand symbolized more than just a fresh start. It was a declaration of purpose. The center would no longer revolve around the charisma of a single leader but would instead prioritize transparency, accountability, and community-driven service. The reopening ceremony was a modest affair, in stark contrast to the grand anniversary services of the past. Miriam Turner stood before the gathered crowd, her voice steady as she spoke of renewal and responsibility. "This is not about forgetting the past," she said. "It's about learning from it, about facing our mistakes and choosing to grow. Hope Renewal is not just a name, it's our mission." The congregation was smaller now, but those who stayed were fiercely committed. They organized community programs, from food drives to mentorship initiatives, ensuring that the center became a hub of healing and support. Slowly but surely, the center's reputation grew, attracting those seeking not perfection, but authenticity and connection. For Miriam, stepping into a leadership role was both daunting and liberating. She had always defined herself in relation to others, Samuel's wife, the pastor's supportive partner. Now she was finding her own voice, discovering the strength and resilience that had always been within her. As the director of Hope Renewal, Miriam brought a unique combination of compassion and pragmatism. She led by example, often staying late to clean up after events or sitting with individuals who needed a listening ear. Her humility and determination inspired those around her, making her a beloved figure in the community. Miriam also became a vocal advocate for accountability within religious institutions. Invited to speak at conferences and community events, she shared her story openly, emphasizing the importance of transparency and ethical leadership. Though revisiting the past was painful, it was also cathartic, a way of transforming her experiences into something meaningful. "I used to think grace was something bestowed upon us," she told an audience at a leadership summit. "But now I see it as something we practice every day, in how we treat each other, in how we face the truth, and in how we choose to move forward." Despite the history between them, Miriam and Serena found themselves drawn together by their shared love for Olivia and their commitment to making amends. Their relationship was far from easy. It was marked by moments of tension and unresolved hurt. But over time, they learned to navigate these complexities, forging an unlikely but genuine bond. Serena, now free and determined to rebuild her life, channeled her energy into advocacy work. Partnering with Miriam, she launched a program at Hope Renewal to support single mothers, offering resources, counseling, and a safe space to share their experiences. The program quickly became one of the center's most impactful initiatives. "I never thought I'd be standing here," Serena admitted during the program's launch event, her voice trembling with emotion. "But if sharing my story can help even one woman avoid the mistakes I made, then it's worth it." Miriam stood beside her, offering a reassuring smile. "Redemption isn't about erasing the past," she said. "It's about using it to create a better future. And Serena, you're doing just that." Released from prison after serving his sentence, Samuel Turner returned to Atlanta a changed man. His time behind bars had stripped away the illusions he once clung to, forcing him to confront the full weight of his actions. Though he knew he could never fully make amends, he was determined to contribute in whatever ways he could. Samuel reached out to Miriam and the leadership at Hope Renewal, offering to volunteer behind the scenes. He helped with administrative tasks, repaired furniture, and even served meals at community events. He kept a low profile, avoiding public roles and declining invitations to speak. This wasn't about reclaiming his former position. It was about quietly serving and supporting the mission he had once jeopardized. One evening, as he swept the center's kitchen after a community dinner, Miriam approached him. "Thank you for all you've been doing," she said. "It means a lot to the people here." Samuel looked up, his expression humble. "I don't deserve thanks," he replied. "I'm just grateful to have a chance to help, even in small ways." At the heart of this transformation was Olivia, the young girl whose existence had brought so much pain but also so much healing. Under Miriam's care, Olivia had flourished. She excelled in school, made friends at the center, and grew into a bright and compassionate young woman. Olivia now split her time between Miriam and Serena, benefiting from the love and support of both women. It was an unconventional arrangement, but it worked. On Sundays, she attended services at Hope Renewal with Miriam, and on weekends, she baked cookies and painted with Serena. Together, they created a stable and loving environment that allowed Olivia to thrive. "Mama Miriam, do you think Daddy will ever come back to church?" Olivia asked one day as they walked through the center's garden. Miriam paused, considering her answer. "That's up to him," she said gently. "But what matters is that he's trying to be a better person, in his own way. And no matter what, he'll always love you." Hope Renewal Center became a beacon in the community, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. It stood as a testament to the power of resilience and second chances, attracting people from all walks of life who were searching for healing. On the center's anniversary, Miriam stood before a packed crowd. Serena sat in the front row, Olivia by her side, while Samuel watched from the back, a quiet observer. Miriam's voice carried through the room, filled with conviction. "This center isn't about me or anyone else who stands here," she said. "It's about all of us, coming together to face our challenges and find hope. We're not defined by our mistakes, but by how we choose to grow from them." As the audience erupted in applause, Miriam caught Serena's eye, and the two women exchanged a small, knowing smile. They had come a long way from that fateful day, and while the journey wasn't over, they had found a way to move forward together. As the sun set on the celebration, casting a warm glow over the center, Miriam stood in the garden with Olivia. They watched as families laughed and shared stories, the air filled with a sense of possibility. "Mama Miriam," Olivia said softly, "I think we've built something really special here." Miriam wrapped an arm around her, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "We have, sweetheart," she replied, "and this is just the beginning." In that moment, Miriam felt the weight of the past lift just a little more. The road ahead was still uncertain, but it was also filled with hope, love, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready to embrace it, one step at a time. The story of Hope Renewal Center reminds us all that redemption is possible, even in the face of betrayal and pain. It shows us the power of honesty, forgiveness, and love in creating a better future. If this story touched your heart, please share it with others and remember to subscribe for more inspiring stories of resilience and hope. Together we can build a world where second chances lead to brighter tomorrows. If this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Together we can spread stories of resilience, second chances, and the incredible power of love and forgiveness. Thank you for being a part of this journey, and we'll see you in the next story.